This is my experience with possible drug dealers, murderers. Some info. I am a boy, and when this happened I was 16, 130 pounds and 5'3", and I am a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. My friend Mason was about to turn 15. I live in Dallas, Texas, and it was winter, so we had on pullover sweaters. Now for the story. Me and Mason were exploring our clubhouse, which is nothing more than a wooded drainage area separated into two parts by an old run-down metal fence, one that backs up to our neighborhood, and one, much bigger, that leads to fenced-in fields, and also has fenced-in fields on both sides. This is important later, so we were exploring and shooting our airsoft pistols. Mine is a green US Marine Special and his is just a plain black one. We were getting ready to leave when we saw two people, a boy and a girl, sitting by the entrance exit. The only exit. So we just sank back in until they were gone. So we walked up to the fence that separates the two parts of the area, when a guy, around our age, approached us from out of nowhere, but thankfully, on the other side, with an axe, a small one, but still an axe. He kept asking us to buy weed. Neither of us smoke or do drugs, and saying it was real cheap and we just needed to follow him. Then, out of nowhere, I'm guessing his buddy, again around our age, a very, very pale person, really. I don't think this guy had ever seen the sun once in his life. Showed up with a large club-like stick and had a large hunting knife on his belt. He also said we could get real cheap weed and cocaine if we followed them. My friend was trying to talk our way out of this while I, with ADHD, ADD, and a couple of other learning disabilities, was trying to figure out the situation and think of a way out of it. Let me say that I love listening to these stories online, but I never thought I would have one of my own. Now, the way I saw it, we had two ways out of this. Go with them, but make a run for it, or run back to the heavier wooded part and jump the electric barbed wire fence onto a field with cows and a couple bulls. But my friend had a better idea. He took his airsoft gun out, remember it's all black, and pointed it at them. They backed off, and we jumped the fence and bolted for his house. These guys and 4 other people left just after we did. They all had 1 or 2 weapons, thankfully. They walked in the opposite direction. We didn't call the cops or tell our parents. Now that I think about it, we should have. Let's just say that we didn't leave his house for a few hours. I am now 17, 5'7", and 165 pounds. A second-rank white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and much stronger. I don't want to think about what would have happened if we had followed them. Please be aware the following story contains themes of attempted rape. I will never forget this encounter. It changed my life forever. I was 19 and hanging out with a friend who was older. She was almost 30. It was one of those friendships where, even though there was an age difference, we were the same age maturity-wise. She was a train wreck, and I wasn't much better. We were the type of girls who go to rock shows and ask musicians to autograph our boobs. I was the type of girl who had been nicknamed Scrapper, because no matter how stacked against me the odds were, I always managed to figure it out. Yes, I was wild, but that didn't mean I deserved what was about to happen to me. Some guy she knew had just bought a local nightclub and was in the process of renovating it. We planned to meet him and his friend at the club for some drinks and a puff. We got to the club and started drinking, smoking, and dancing. I remember thinking that it was really cool to be in a nightclub and to have the whole place to ourselves. I will always remember the song Around the World by Daft Punk, blaring through the speakers as we danced. My friend seemed to be getting along very well with his friend. As a matter of fact, they were making out so aggressively it was a little uncomfortable. So, Clubman looked at the X-rated activities of my friend, looked at me and winked. He then asked me if I would like to see what he had done with the downstairs of the club. Now, I will be the first to admit maybe I was a little naive here. But being drunk and stoned didn't exactly help my spidey senses tingle in the face of potential danger. I followed him down the stairs into a very large, poorly lit room. He took my hand and led me to the other end, helping me maneuver over lumber, cords, and tools that were everywhere. At one point, it became so dark, I told him that it was creepy down there. He laughed, assured me everything was all right, and told me to stand right there while he went to turn on a light. A bright light came on, and at the same time I felt myself falling. He had shoved me hard, and I remember blinking because the light blinded me. But also because I was shocked that he was pushing me to the floor. I landed on something soft and springy. I turned my head and blinked furiously in the light, trying to see. I was laying on a very dingy mattress on the floor. Next to the mattress was a pile of porno mags and some rope. Understanding swept over me like a wave, and my heart started racing. Bewildered, I started to mutter, "No, I think you have the wrong idea here." I will never forget the image of the evil grin spreading across his face as I looked up at him from the mattress. "No, I think you have the wrong idea here," he said with his grin widening. He fell on top of me, at the same time putting his hand over my mouth. I remember a small scream escaped me as the weight of his body knocked the wind out of me. In that moment, I became keenly aware of exactly where I was, alone on a mattress in a basement with a strange man almost twice my age. The steady thumping bass from the club overhead made my heart sink. Even if I screamed, no one would hear me. My mind raced, and I began to regret every stupid decision I had made that led me to this moment. He began to push my legs apart using his legs. But his legs slipped on the pant legs of my jeans. Before I even knew what I was doing, I raised my knee with all of the force I could muster. I hit him hard directly in the family jewels. Though I doubt anything precious could ever spring from his loins. So hard, I had a bruise on my knee. I ran toward the stairs, tripping and falling over tools as I went. I didn't look back, but I'm pretty sure I heard him vomit. I flew up the stairs and found my friend leaning against a wall making out with Club Creep's friend. I grabbed her hand and jerked her toward the door, breathlessly saying, "We have to go right now." Bewildered, she followed me to the car. We got in and peeled out. She kept asking me what was going on, but I couldn't answer yet. 10 minutes later, I pulled over the car, threw up, and finally dissolved into tears. I told her what had happened. She demanded we drive to the police station, but she drove because I was shaking too much. I told my story to the police, who immediately sent officers to the location. They did not find anyone there. But they did tell me they found a vomit-covered mattress in the basement. It was surrounded by porno mags, rope, zip ties, and even a pair of handcuffs. Upon hearing this, I vomited again. The police followed up with the club owner, who was definitely not club creep. The police searched for the man and his friend, but never found either one. Unfortunately, my friend had only met the guy once before at a local bar and had very little information to contribute. To the club creep, let's not meet again, but if we do, I'll make sure you can't reproduce. I have to say, even after a year has passed, I feel almost guilty that this happened. I'm sorry to turn this into a weird personal thing, but I need to write it all out, even this weird prologue. So like I said, I feel guilty. I used to read the stories on this subreddit and wonder what it was like to have someone obsessed with you. As a girl who never had anyone pay much attention to her, in a weird and really fucked up way, I wanted something like this to happen to me. And I'm so sorry to anyone who has ever been harassed or stalked, because I was so wrong. And I'm sorry if this comes across as fake. I have no idea how to prove it. All I can do is tell you what happened. I live in a small town. There's not much to do. One of the things that attracts lots of kids, red flag already, right, is the pool. The pool building has lots of stuff, like a concert venue, a skating rink, etc. That's where a young girl was first approached by a man. He said a few things, not a big deal. Then when the same girl was leaving the pool, the man attempted to get her in his truck. The girl's sister came out of the building at the perfect time and got her out of that situation. I don't know a lot of specifics because that girl wasn't me. She was my next door neighbor. So I noticed when the drive-by started. We live on a dead-end street, so if someone drives down our street, they have to drive around the little circle at the end and go back. I'm up late often, and I noticed a red truck always driving by, pausing in front of that same girl's house, and then continuing on. This was always sometime past midnight. During a football game when all the neighbors were gathered at the same house, I brought it up. The mother of the girl instantly went pale and asked for more information. I eventually had to talk to a police officer, but didn't have much to tell him. I didn't know enough about vehicles to recognize make, but I described it to the best of my ability. Sadly, this didn't lead to anything, except for an angry Facebook post from the mother's friend. The truck visit slowed after that, until midsummer. It was the middle of the day when the red truck stopped at the end of our street. A man got out and walked towards the girl's house. Her mom and her sister were gone for an appointment, and the girl was playing on the front lawn with a few of the other neighborhood kids. The man had his phone out and aimed at the kids. This is probably the stupidest decision I've ever made, but I love those kids. And I'm sorry that this sounds like I'm hyping myself up, but this is the truth. I've known them since they were babies, They play in our backyard. I've babysat them all. So I went outside. I asked the guy what he was doing. He was visibly put off, and quickly said he needed directions to the center of town. I pointed him in the right direction, which is the direction he'd been coming from in the first place, and he left. I called the police after that, and I thought that'd be the end. I was wrong. The girl was left alone, but my hell had just begun. The red truck would be waiting outside of my high school almost every day, at the edge of the lot where the school's cameras didn't reach. I parked in the upper lot, far away from him, so I was never really in danger, but it was still unnerving. A series of fake accounts tried to follow my Instagram, add me on Facebook, and follow me on Twitter. The bio lines at first were blank, but after I'd blocked them all, they began to get sinister. They were never threats. Instead, they were filled with personal details: my birthday, my phone number, my address, etc. I told my parents immediately, and took screenshots of all the accounts, and went to the police, who took all the information, but said that until a serious threat or something like that emerged, they couldn't do anything. I feel no resentment towards the police, as I think their hands really were tied. In response, I took down all my accounts and changed my number. By now it was late fall, early winter. My car got keyed in my own driveway. Our front door would randomly be banged on in the middle of the night. A co-worker at the store where I worked told me a scruffy guy had come into our store, which was a knockoff Claire's type thing, so it was a little strange, and just wandered around. Eventually, he asked when my next shift was. My co-worker wouldn't tell him. He left without fuss. My school got a call that I had lice. I was called out of class, and the rumor spread. Bizarre, but humiliating all the same. When I had to get the mail from the box at the end of the street, a car, not the red truck, would drive slowly behind me, and then drive away at a tire-squealing pace when I turned around to see who it was. Eventually, after about a 3-month period of the events dwindling, they stopped altogether. I still have no idea why. I guess this has stuck with me so long because it kept changing. He never stuck to the same tactic long, kept changing it, like he was Googling creepy things to do to your stalking victim. And there was no real ending. And I am aware that these were all tiny things, but they added up. About a year of my life was spent in constant suspense, and now I still always look over my shoulder. I won't go out alone after dark. I keep the shades in our living room closed after 7 p.m. Maybe the scariest thing was that I felt like I was doing everything right. I told my parents. I got proof. And I was still powerless. I'm just glad it's over. When I was 25, over 10 years ago, I met a guy who grew up with some friends of mine. He seemed really cool, and we started dating. After about a month, I noticed Kurt was very jealous and controlling. If I mentioned I was with a group of friends, if any of the guys were single, he accused me of sleeping with them and would ignore me for a couple of days. In retrospect, I should have gotten out of Dodge, but I was admittedly an insecure girl who was afraid to be alone back then. Another few weeks passed, and I'm a week away from getting my new apartment, which was in the same complex as his. I figure I can tough it out and break up with him when I get the place. Staying at his house was a quick walk to work. Staying at my friend's was a half-hour bike ride on a rough gravel shoulder on the side of a dark highway. Turned out, he broke up with me. No big deal. This is where it gets ugly. He would continuously message me on MSN with passive-aggressive insults. He was the king of jabs that, to an outsider, wouldn't seem so bad. I tried blocking him and changing my email, but he would realize he was blocked and start contacting friends. He even contacted a really obscure friend I had never talked about, leading me to believe he hacked my email. He would show up at my patio doors and walk right in if it wasn't locked. He'd come in and just grab things and say he was borrowing it. He'd bring it back, and things stayed peaceful, I guess. One day he came in and I was in my room folding laundry. He proceeded to flirt and joke. It was actually funny, so I laughed. He took that as an invite, and sparing the details, didn't stop until I was in tears. That was the day I started double-checking the patio doors and sacrificed a nice breeze on warm days. At the time, because I knew him and was laughing with him, I thought I was to blame, so never told anyone. Couple weeks later, I was at his brother's place in his building. Small town. He called me asking where I was. I asked if he was at my door. I looked outside and sure enough, he was there. I told him I was at his brother's. I'd known his brother for years before I even knew he existed. His brother never even mentioned him. Now I know why. Kurt started accusing me of sleeping with his brother. I went downstairs to calm him, feeling safe since his brother was in the building and knew where I was. He yelled at me and kicked me in the stomach. I went back and told his brother, who was going to go confront him, but I told him no. With that, I went to the police and made a report. I also had the police come facilitate getting possessions back. He refused to return. That was a separate call. I did not get my things that day. Kurt told the cops they were gifts to him. He later returned them on his own time because... control. Things quieted down. I eventually got a new boyfriend in the States. I was living close to the Detroit border. My boyfriend contacted me and said Kurt tried to add him on MySpace. I looked at the existing page and he had changed it so it was all pictures of me with slanderous comments. He did that so my boyfriend would see it. Luckily, the boyfriend knew all about him already. If you're wondering why I didn't go to the police again, here's why. I would text him often telling him off and threaten to go to the police. He would then threaten to charge me with harassment due to the texts. My career relies on a clear criminal check. I was afraid to risk it. Also, when I reported the assault, the small-town officer claimed he could use force to remove me from his apartment, even after I said I never entered, but was in the hallway. I didn't trust the police now. He would watch my apartment and ask whose car was in my spot, telling me he felt betrayed. He would message me telling me he made dinner and to come over. To be honest, I was afraid not to. I'd go, eat, and leave. It seemed to make him feel he was in control, and I felt it was better than any potential lashing out if I didn't go. I eventually moved to another town, but the passive-aggressive abuse continued. Kurt had moved to another province where my niece lived, coincidence, and started using my niece to get at me. They conspired to tell me he sexually assaulted her. I stopped speaking to her as well after that. Who does that? I eventually moved across the country, and even then, a year later, he contacted someone I met up with out there that was also from our hometown. Only when this guy told him he knows all about him, and if he messes with me, he's messing with him, did it finally all stop. Then 10 years later, last October, I moved back home. I didn't change my location on my Facebook because even years later I didn't want him easily finding out where I was. I also posted that if anyone asks about me, not to share my information. I got a notification on a dating website that Kurt wanted to meet me. I know this was his way of letting me know he's back too and still around. I hadn't thought of seeing him on there. I was afraid to go out at night, and when I did, I was always looking over my shoulder. A week passed with no further contact. A few weeks later, I saw him at a festival. We made eye contact, and I hated that he may have seen my initial expression of shock. So I composed myself and said hello. He simply smirked. I felt like I had looked into the eyes of the devil. I left, watching to make sure he didn't follow me, and to make sure he didn't see what car I got into. I knew that he had seriously abused women since, but had gotten off every time because he hires the best lawyers. My only comfort is that I don't think he revisits the past too much because those women know what he is. His charm won't fool us a second time. I had been contacted about one of the most recent women and was wanting to contribute to the case after speaking to her. So I called the police asking for a copy of my report. The cop, who said he was allowed to kick me, never even filed it. So if anyone has any other ideas how I can prove this to the mods, I'm all ears. Also, my moves were never about him, just making the point that distance didn't stop him. I hope to never see him again, but I hope the law does. His last girlfriend has a permanent brain injury, and the next one will probably not be so lucky. He gets more confident every time he gets away with it. I'm actually nervous about posting this, in case it gets back to him from someone recognizing the story, but I'm smarter now and take more safety precautions. This didn't happen to me, but to my mother in 1981. But it still scares the shit out of me even to this day. Some background. My house, which was on Potrero Hill in San Francisco, is old, dating back to just after the 1906 earthquake, and has a history of weird things happening, especially where my family is concerned. It has a lot of stairs, both inside and outside the house. These stairs curve to the left as you ascend, to have landings in the middle at the bend. The stairs inside the house have a wooden gate across them that we put there to keep my dogs from the downstairs. This will become relevant later. When I was 11 years old, my mother woke in the middle of the night from a sound sleep. She had no idea what had woken her, but she noticed two things. One, that the room was extremely cold, which was odd, since it was a very warm night. And two, all 7 of our cats, who always slept en masse at the foot of the bed, were not there. My mother got a really bad feeling and got out of bed. She went to my room, which is next to the stairs, calling my name as she stood in my doorway. She told me she couldn't wake me, no matter how loud she yelled. I was not a heavy sleeper. Concerned, she was about to go into my room to shake me awake when she heard noises. My mother came out of my room in time to see our 2 dogs, a large Saluki and a small poodle mix, come running up the stairs. They were whimpering, their tails tucked tightly between their legs, and their eyes were wild with terror. They ran right past my mom, disappearing into her bedroom. Our 3rd dog, another Saluki, was standing in front of the wooden gate of the landing, feet apart, hackles up, and growling deep in his chest. Keep in mind, until this point, the most aggressive thing this dog had ever done was piss on someone's leg at a party. So this was totally out of character for him. Surprised, my mother went down the stairs to the landing to see what he was growling at. This is when things got really weird. Our front door is old and creaky, with a metal panel secured with wire over a section of the door where a pane of glass had been broken. Because it was not secured properly, it was making this loud, irritating clanging noise when the door was closed. As my mother stared at the door, trying to see if someone was there, she heard, not saw, mind you, just heard, our front door open. Just so you know, I come from a long line of witches. Yes, witches. And Native American and Central American healers, shamans. And we are no strangers to the peculiar, especially my mother, who did not scare easily. But as she stood at the gate on the landing, she clearly heard the creak of the door's hinges as it opened. She said it reminded her of badly dubbed movie sounds, and goosebumps erupted all over her body, the hair on the back of her neck standing up, as she heard the irritating clanging noise as the door closed. The next thing she heard was footsteps coming down the short hallway towards the stairs. Keep in mind that there is still no one there, and the front door had not opened or closed. My mother said the footsteps sounded like leather shoes, Oxfords maybe, with wooden heels, and that the steps were heel-toe. She said the footsteps sounded heavy and male. The footsteps continued up the stairs, boards groaning under the weight of whatever was coming up the stairs. It stopped at the gate. By this point, my mother had backed up to the wall, away from the wooden gate, scared shitless, but unable to move. Our dog, already growling, suddenly started snarling and snapping and lunging and ducking as if doing battle with the entity. This, my mother said, seemed to go on forever, but eventually, whatever it was, turned on the stairs, still only heard, never seen, and went down the steps, opened the door, and after a brief pause, closed it. Our dog visibly calmed down after the door closed, turning to my mother and licking her hand. My mother completely freaked out and, close to pissing herself, grabbed our dog and hurried back upstairs. The cats, who had been hiding under my mother's dresser and home entertainment center, slowly came out, fur in end and wary, and returned to my mother's bed. She didn't get back to sleep that night and told me about it in the morning. We sold that house several years later, after my mother died, and never told the buyers its unusual history. I figured they would think we were nutters. To this day, we have no idea what it was, or what it wanted, or why my mother was unable to wake me. But we all agreed that whatever it had been, definitely been malevolent. One summer night in 2013, I headed over to my friend's house to hang out with her and her roommate. We had a lot of fun and time flew by. It was already 1 a.m. and it was time for me to go home. My friend offered me to stay the night, but I refused, as I hate staying at other people's homes. I'm just not comfortable. Then her roommate suggested I'd take the bus since it was coming soon. Once again I refused and told her I was going to walk, since it's night out and I love walking, especially while listening to music. Note, my friend lives in a sketchy area, and a lot of drug dealers and sketchy people live there. Also, I'd like to add that I was a teenager but looked much younger. And still do. I was always mistaken for a 12 to 14-year-old. I began my 30-minute walk listening to music. About 20 minutes into my walk, I noticed a white van driving the opposite way I was going. Being late at night and walking alone, I instantly thought of the typical cliché van stories. I chuckled to myself and told myself to stop being so paranoid. As I continued walking and the van got closer, I thought to myself, what if the van stops? What if there are really some crazy people inside of that van? Being the paranoid person that I am, I stopped my music while continuing to walk and dialed 911 on my phone but did not press the call button, just in case. To my horror, the van slowed down and pulled over really close to me, still facing the opposite way. My heart started beating fast. What the fuck? Is this really happening right now? What the fuck do I do now? I just stood there, frozen, looking at the van, to see their next move. The driver's window rolled down. Jenny? A woman in her late 40s to mid-50s asked. No, I'm not Jenny, I said. I felt a little bit of relief when I realized it's just a woman looking for someone. Jenny, is that you? She asked again. Once again I told her that I was not Jenny, and I slowly began to walk again, while still keeping my eyes locked on her. There is no way she didn't hear me, as she was very close to me. The door slowly opened and the lady stepped out. Jenny, is that you? She said while walking slowly towards me, in an almost crouched position. I stopped walking and just stared at her. At this moment I'm totally freaked out, and my fight or flight reaction kicks in. I am not Jenny, I shouted, a bit annoyed. My voice giving the indication that I'm scared, I quickly glanced over to the van, and then in the passenger seat, I saw a scruffy-looking male just staring at me with a blank face. Okay, I need to get the fuck out of here, I thought to myself. As the woman got closer, she glanced at my phone, and I think she saw that I had dialed 911 on my keypad. She backed up a bit, and said she had mistaken me for someone else. Still a little bit spooked, I nodded and began walking again, still keeping my eyes on her. I watched her get back into her van. She rolled down the window again and asked if I knew the directions to some street that I had never heard of. I am very familiar with my city, and that street either didn't exist, or it's somewhere normal people don't go to. I guess she was trying to convince me that she really was looking for someone. Yeah, right. I lied and told her that I am not from the area and walked away faster. The van then sped off in the opposite way I was going, and as I turned a corner to get onto the main street, which was completely empty at this hour, I started bolting it down the street. There was a convenience store nearby, and I was heading towards it. I have the habit of looking behind me, since I'm so paranoid, and as I turned my head to look behind me while still running, I saw the white van behind me. They saw me running, and I guess they realized that I was onto them, if they had any ill intentions. I ran into the store, and the van did not pull into the parking lot. Instead, it passed me by and stopped at a stoplight. Then I watched it disappear into the distance for good. To this day, I don't know whether they had any ill intentions, or if they really were looking for someone, and if they were really lost. But if they were lost, why did they make a U-turn and come back my way? I myself think the lady thought I wasn't worth the trouble, since I wasn't as naive as they thought. I must say I'm thankful that I'm so paranoid. It might have saved my life, because God only knows what kind of intentions they had. Anyhow, creepy lady and scruffy looking male, I never want to see you again. I'd also like to add that you should never walk alone at night, especially if you're a girl. You never know what kind of creeps are on the streets up to no good. I love staying up late. Watching television until 3 a.m. is my bread and butter. Suffice to say, this is the usual thing for me when I'm home alone. With my dad going away for work every 2 weeks and coming home for one, it was very easy for me to get away with it while I was still in school. And for context, I lived with just my dad as my mom passed away from cancer when I was only 12. But I wasn't completely alone though. I had a tuxedo cat, with the most fitting moniker, Tuxedo. I've had him since I turned 16, and he's kept me company during the many long Canadian winter nights when I was by myself. His two favorite places to sit were the small red couch on the right side of my television, and the small table that was placed in front of the large living room window. I also occupied the big red couch right in front of the television. One more important thing to note is that my dad always insisted I close the curtains on the large living room window when it became nighttime. To him, he thought it was dangerous to let people see into the house and could tempt them to break in. But in my mind, I always figured no one would be dumb enough to break into a house with lights on, instead of a house with no lights on at all. So I usually just left them open the entire 2 weeks he was away because... laziness. So on this particular night, I was watching a documentary. I think it was about some couple being held hostage somewhere in Australia. These certain documentaries would be on very late, which wasn't a problem for 18-year-old me in the slightest. Tuxedo obviously felt differently, as he had chosen to gaze outside the living room window instead. As it had just entered commercial break, Tuxedo started giving soft cries as his eyes were staring in the direction of the front door, which was on the left side of the window. He usually does this if he sees someone outside at the door. which was more commonly done during the day than the night for obvious reasons. It was actually very out of the ordinary for Tuxedo to do this so late. At first, I assumed it might have been an outdoor cat or wild rabbit by the door, but I could tell Tuxedo's wail was especially worrisome, so I decided to check it out for myself. Here's the layout of my front door entrance. Tuxedo and I were on the top floor, but the entrance was at a lower level that was between the top floor and the basement. There was a small staircase that went down from the top floor towards the front door, and a second small staircase that went further down away from the door to the basement. Hopefully that was a good explanation of it. So I'm standing at the top of the staircase, about to go down and open the door to see for myself, when I see a large shadowy figure in the frosted glass of my front door. I nearly collapsed to the ground when I saw this. It was definitely not my dad. And 11 p.m. at night, it was certainly not something I expected to see. I could tell whoever this was had something in the door and was trying to pry it open. At that moment, something came over me that I can't explain. It might have been the fact that I knew I had no one in the house to come help me, or the fact that I felt an urgency to protect Tuxedo from this intruder. But I grabbed my cell phone off the arm of the couch and threw on the lights over the front door. The shadowy figure was now fully visible and clearly startled as our eyes met through the frosted glass. His face displayed in a jagged reflection. "Leave now. I'm calling the police. Leave." I didn't even get to finish before he was dashing off my yard and into a car across the street. Before I could even tell the make and model, let alone a license plate, he was gone. All that remained was a crude crowbar on the front step. Now, it's up for debate what that man was at my house for. I certainly didn't recognize him in the few seconds I looked at him. While this definitely shattered my imagined immunity from danger, if the lights were still on, part of me wonders if he might have still attacked if I wasn't awake that night. One thing is for sure, Tuxedo saved my life that night. I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if Tuxedo wasn't looking out the window that night. This is a story about the most disturbing thing that ever happened to me while delivering pizzas in high school. There are a few others, but this one stands out above the rest. I was 16 years old and just got my license, so I needed a job to pay for a car. A few of my good friends were working at a local pizza place in town, close to my house. So I decided to apply and got the job, without having to interview because they were so short-staffed. They also hired me as a delivery driver, without ever checking to see if I had a driver's license or not. I did, but I always thought that was funny. About a month or two later, we were having a really busy night, and I was sent off to a delivery in a fairly nice part of town, the next city over. This was before GPS was common, and not very reliable, so we still used maps to locate houses. This particular house was in a new development, so it wasn't listed in any of our directories. But my boss thought he knew where it was and gave me directions. He was way off, so I had to call the house for directions, and this is where things got weird. The conversation on the phone was normal. I told the man I was near his house but needed directions because the ones I was given weren't accurate. He was very understanding and told me how to get there from the road I was on. A few minutes later, I pull into his driveway and instantly get a bad feeling. He was a man in his early 50s to 60s and was standing in the middle of his driveway with a creepy, satisfied smile on his face and wearing a maroon silk bathrobe. I got out of my car and gave him his 10-inch Hawaiian pizza, which cost $10.95 at the time. He gave me a $20 bill and told me to keep the change. Considering I was late on the delivery and had to call the customer for directions, I wasn't expecting anything for a tip, let alone almost $10. I drove away from the delivery thinking that something was off, but I got a great tip, so I was happy. I lit up a smoke and turned up my radio when I felt my phone vibrate. It was the number from the house I was just at. I got nervous, thinking it was going to be a complaint or something, because why else would someone call the delivery guy after he has delivered your food? My blood curdled at the words that came out of his mouth. "You want to come back over and get the knife?" he said. Or at least, that is what I heard. I said nothing and hung up the phone and drove back to work as fast as I could. I also called one of my friends who was working there at the time and told him what happened. On the 5-minute ride back to work, he called me at least 3 or 4 more times. For some reason, I actually answered one of the calls and he asked me if I wanted to come back after I get off work and spend the night. I was greeted at work by laughter from pretty much everyone working that night. Everyone thought I was either faking or overreacting. Then I got another call on my phone from the same guy. I showed my manager while the phone was ringing and let it go to voicemail. That's when he decided to call the restaurant. Once this happened, my manager realized this was probably a serious situation and answered the phone pretending to be me. He had a very short conversation with the guy and at the end told him he is not allowed to do business with us anymore and we are blocking his number. When my boss hung up the phone, his face was pure white and looked like he could barely comprehend what had just happened. I asked what the guy said, but my boss would not repeat the words that came out of his mouth. I was so paranoid that I had to stay with a friend that night instead of going home. Guess who called me a couple hours later? Yes, he called. At least 10 times. For at least a week or 2, I was living in fear of being kidnapped. I was always looking at the people or cars that were around me, being paranoid that I was being watched or followed. It's possible that I was right because I started getting phone calls again. This is when I decided it was time to call the cops and put an end to this. I explained everything to the officer, and he assured me that he would take care of the situation. Turns out the cop did nothing. I live in a low-crime town of less than 20,000 people. This guy didn't have anything else to do that day except write some speeding tickets during the afternoon, then some DWIs in the evening. The calls kept coming, and my paranoia grew. This needed to stop, so I told my boss that things hadn't improved, and he called the cops himself. An officer came down to the restaurant and took down our statements. Unlike the other officer, this man seemed visibly shaken and angered by the events that had happened. He promised me that he would personally handle the situation, and I didn't have to worry anymore. This police officer followed up on what he said, and I never heard from that creep again. I kept that same job for about 3 years, and had nothing but great times there. However, creepy silk bathrobe fuckface, go fuck yourself and let's not meet, alright? It's Saturday night. I'm wearing a floral dress and my hair is tousled to perfection. My lips stained a crimson red, bound to make him eat his heart out, across the dinner table. A car approaches my house, and a handsome 22-year-old dude steps out and opens the passenger side door for me. I smile. He smiles. I get in the car and soon we are on our way for some noodles. Cue black-eyed peas, I got a feeling. So we get our food. We make first date talk, yada yada yada. I do this all the time. Except this dude is cooler than most, and the conversation is pretty free-flowing and involved. Seems to me like we're really vibing. After the check is paid and the leftover yakisoba is all loaded up, in the carry-out box, he takes my hand on our way back to the car and casually asks if I'd like to conclude the night back at his place. I agree, and once again we are on our way. Now I must express to you just how normal and cool this dude seemed thus far. Pretty great. I was kinda stoked about how well we were getting along, and schoolgirl giddy at the way he held my hand. This, of course, was before I knew about the shooting stars. We arrive at his place and go out on the balcony for a smoke. And suddenly, it's like someone flipped some kind of maniac switch. This guy was pointing all over the sky, screaming about these shooting stars that were in the sky. I'm just like, dude, you're tripping. Though he proceeds to grab my shoulders and spin me around forcefully so that I'm facing the trees, parallel to the balcony, all the while feverishly pointing and screaming, There, do you see it? I'm about 3 jerks away from shaken baby syndrome, so I just go, yeah, I see it, I see the motherfucking shooting star. And he lets me go, and heaves this cartoonish sigh of relief, and says more to himself than to me, Thank God you saw it. Can't believe you almost missed it. So, that was weird as fuck. But I try my best to brush it off as we go back inside, and I mean, things are okay, I guess. I'm almost completely turned off by your weird imaginary astronomy lesson, but I'm doing my best to remain collected. That's a little bit of a feat though, let me tell you, as this guy's eyes were becoming crazier by the second. I wanted out so bad. But in a stroke of genius, I had agreed to him picking me up for the date, so he is my ride home. Okay, so what, Indigo? Just make an excuse about plans in the morning and ask politely for him to drive you home. I go over and over it in my head, trying to find the wording that sounds the least like, you seriously creep me out, so I think it's time I go now. At this point, he had disappeared for a bit, and when he returned, I was all ready to flash a smile and make my out. I open my mouth and begin my well-thought-out speech when I notice the handle of vodka in his hand. Oh, fuck. Clearly he had not decided to wait for me to begin imbibing spirits, and was already quite inebriated. Plan A was a no-go. I decided to wait out the storm by limiting his alcohol consumption as much as possible and abstaining entirely myself. The minutes crawled by at the speed of a snail down a frozen road in December. Finally, the rays of dawn began to break through the blinds. Well, as much as sunlight can break through, how tightly he had closed them, to avoid seeing the shadow figures. And I was so ready to go home and hold my rabbit. Seemed like this ordeal was just about over, right? Bro, you ain't even heard the worst of it. As we drive to my house, he says, "Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I know I'm not." And I debate even responding, but I decide to ask, "Who is everyone?" Then, I shit you not, the following comes out of his mouth. I can hear them in the car most of the time. They say the same stuff around here that they said in San Francisco. Always talking. Like that one time when I was locked in a car for a week and I was raped in the ass with a sword. And then the sword was shoved down my throat too. I am flabbergasted. I am frightened. I am feeling very unsafe. I managed to choke out something along the lines of, dude, maybe you should see a doctor about that stuff. Clearly, he has heard this before, as he has a whole spiel prepared, and at the ready to fire his bullets of insanity at me. You see, that's what I mean. I've already been to the hospital 2 times, and had doctors diagnose this and that, and prescribe everything under the sun, but I knew I was just an observer of truth. And that's what people will never understand. And my mom was there and she was crying, and I went over to comfort her and reassure her that I would keep her safe from the things that they say. Then he smiles at me. "We have arrived at my house. Oh my God. I'm safe. I'm home. I'll be okay. I just have to open the door and make it out alive." Well, you have a nice day. And then I very calmly exit the car and walk into chez moi. I kinda look around in shock, sort of astounded that I made it out of that situation with all of my skin. I walk over and sit on the couch and just kinda stare straight ahead until my roommate comes downstairs and asks me what's up. The dam of all dams breaks, and I nearly flood my house with tears and break all the windows with my shrill, hysterical scream explanation of the last 12 hours. She consoles me as well as scolds me for not calling me when shit got weird initially. She then made me bacon, and I felt much more centered. Disclaimer: mental illness is not a joke. I am in no way trying to poke fun or make light of a situation where someone is clearly so out of their minds that it's become genuinely disturbing, unsettling, and downright dangerous. By no means is anyone with a mental illness lesser or any of its synonyms, but there are certain chemical imbalances in the brain which require the help of medication to eradicate hallucinations, delusions, etc. The way this guy was talking to me, and the look in his eyes, something was clearly not right. He is clearly in need of help. And I'm kind of at a loss here, as I really feel like he needs to be in the care of some professionals until he can be stabilized, but one, I hardly know this guy. I mean, I know where he lives and his phone number. That should be enough. But it's really not my responsibility. I'm not his girlfriend. We've been on 1 date. And you better believe I'm not itching for a second one. 2, be committed against one's will, it has to be proven that you're either a danger to others or a danger to yourself. Even if I did totally overstep and put my nose where it doesn't belong, and 5150 him, I doubt the responding officer is going to rule him in either of those categories because, like I said at the beginning, for quite a while this dude seemed 100% normal. Cool, even. So Reddit, thanks for reading. I know it was quite a lot and maybe a bit melodramatic. It was really not a fun spot to be in though. Any advice or suggestions on what course of action, if any, I'm leaning towards forgetting the entire thing happened completely, would be most appropriate and welcomed. And as for you, Shooting Star Guy, I hope you get the help you need. I really do. Just far, far away from me. This is an ongoing story. A little backstory. I'm a 5'4", 125-pound female, and spent 4 years of my life in a very abusive relationship with a 6'5", 380-pound boy. Finally, one day I'd had enough of being his punchbag, that I beat the hell out of him and left, never looking back. Fast forward 3 years to September 20th, 2016. My new boyfriend, together 2 years, got in a serious accident. Though he wasn't seriously injured, thank God, the vehicle was totaled. Later that night I was on Facebook and ran across a picture of the accident with the caption, "The reason why you don't text and drive," from a man I'd never even met. I was immediately pissed because my man wasn't texting and had documented proof that he wasn't even on the phone when the accident occurred. So I messaged the poster correcting him and asking him to remove the post and check facts before lying and posting things like that. He immediately texted my man and told him, "I know where your house is, and I'm not afraid of showing up to shut you up if you don't shut your woman up." So I returned his message with my account, with "Don't threaten him when I'm the one with the issue, douchebag." He informed me I'd better be scared because he knows where I live. I told him he doesn't scare me. He stated I must be a big bitch, referencing my weight. I stated, "No, dynamite comes in small packages." He then proceeds to drive by my house and honk. But when I walk out, he took off. 20 minutes later, he decided to drive by again, but I saw him coming, so I stepped into the road. Stupid. I know. He swerved around and took off again, but 5 minutes later, drove by yet again. I have insomnia, so I don't sleep much, so I decided to sit out most of the night, listening to Hellfreezer's 30 Scary Stories number 3, and wait to see if this asshole tried anything stupid. He didn't come back that night. The following day, he drove by and slowed down to 5 miles per hour. When I yelled, "You want to talk?" he floored it and sped off. He drove by 3 additional times that day, slowing down each time he got near my house. Today, September 23rd, I walked down to the gas station a block away from my home, and as I'm getting ready to leave, can you guess who walked in? Creepy stalker dude. I looked him straight in the eyes as I slowly walked out of the door, and I slowly, and I mean very, very slowly, walked home. Normal walk takes 2 minutes, I made it last 10. So, creepy stalker dude that likes to stare at my house while driving, slower than a turtle, let's not meet again. For if we do, you will regret it because I'm not scared. A few years ago, our local newspaper posted an article about prostitutes in our town, interviewing them and having them talk about their thoughts and feelings on prostitution. I live somewhere this issue is very often up for discussion. Either way, this story is linked to that, because one of those prostitutes sounded a lot like me. By the way I'm wording this, I'm sure it's obvious that it wasn't me, and I've never worked as a prostitute. At the time, I was a student, doing things that students do, hanging at pubs and being hungover at lectures. Having had a hard time through high school, college was like a fresh breeze for me. I met my kind of people, got to choose the classes that I liked, and I felt for the first time that my life was going somewhere. For a 20-something girl with a pretty uneventful life, it was a good experience. As students do, I made a lot of new friends and started volunteering in organizations. In particular, there was this bar where I used to hang out, where I eventually started doing volunteer shifts. I liked the idea of a bar driven by students on a daily basis. And even though I didn't get any money for working there, the alcohol was cheap, and the community was great. I absolutely adored it there. A few months into this, there was this guy. He kept coming back, and he seemed to have taken a special interest in me. I didn't put too much into it at first. As you should be when working in a bar, I was always nice and polite. Greeted him and we did some small talk while I went around cleaning tables. After a while, it seemed like he was always there. He found me on Facebook, added me, and started chatting with me on a regular basis. Initially, there was nothing weird about the conversations, except a few jokes that seemed a little off. Like when he asked me what I did for a living and I told him the place where I worked, my part-time job, and actually made money. He joked about it being an escort service. I didn't know him very well, so it made me a little uncomfortable. But I wrote back, no, it's not. And the conversation ended there. Over the next few months, things escalated. I didn't have shifts at the bar for a while, so I spent most of my days on the other end of the bar, being served beer instead of serving it. Again, the community was pretty great, so I usually came in at 10 in the morning, got some work done before classes or after classes, and spent all my free time hanging out with my friends at the pub. We were all pretty tight-knit, and I still talk to most of them to this day. Since I was now the one getting drunk, he seemed to be coming around more often. Most of his days seemed to consist of sitting alone and staring at us. Now, when I say staring, I don't mean looking at us. I mean intense stares, to the degree of which you can feel it, even when you can't see them. I started feeling bad for him. I suggested to my friends that we should invite him over, but one of the older regulars objected pretty harshly. She then proceeded to show me a website which allegedly was run by him. It was porn. At this time, I was very pronounced as an anti-porn activist, but I'm also generally very shy of conflict, so I shrugged it off. Although I did decide not to invite him over to avoid conflict with the others, as they didn't seem too keen. He kept making small talk with me on a regular basis whenever he'd see me there, and my friends kept telling me to stay away from him. I had to admit that the way he was always around and seemed to take a very special interest in me was getting slightly creepy. But no more than I could handle. I was sure he was just socially awkward. After all, he was in his 30s and hanging out an awful lot in a place filled with what was mostly 20-year-olds. Most of the time he seemed to be alone as well. After months of this, I started getting more annoyed and a little scared. I was drunk and outside smoking, and he followed me outside, so we started talking. And I mentioned this whole thing about porn and my friends not being too fond of him. It turned out that the site was run by him, and he gave me a long rant about freedom of speech and porn being a legal business. Even though I never really objected to anything, still very shy of conflict, I could tell he was really angry, to the point where he was shaking, and for a few seconds, I was scared he'd actually punch me. We got into a political discussion that did not end well, and eventually he threatened to sue both me and my friends for slander. He deleted me off his social media profiles, and for me that was the end of that. I didn't see him around for a while, and honestly, he wasn't really a face I would miss. Now this is where the start of my story actually becomes relevant. A few weeks later, a friend of mine sends me a picture of things that had been posted on this guy's Facebook account after the fight. There were long rants with my name in them, links to the article I mentioned previously about the prostitute, that sounded an awful lot like me with my full name. He wrote that he had slept with me as a prostitute, that I was not worth the money spent, and that I was a disgrace to the entire sex profession. These posts went weeks back, and the last post had been made the day my friend sent me this. There were approximately 5 to 6 posts a day with my name in them. At this point, I started getting scared. So I alerted the board at my college, and they said they'd look into it. Considering what happened next, my guess is the meeting didn't go very well. About a month later, a friend of mine pulled me aside at the pub. She said she had to show me something. She pulled up his website. He had made a picture slideshow with manipulated pornographic pictures with my face on them. I'd heard about revenge porn before, but I never really thought I'd be a victim of it. Especially not after what had, to me, just been a small political discussion while having a cigarette at a pub with someone who had been a regular for almost a year. I was devastated, and immediately contacted the cops, who made him take the pictures down, and I filed a restraining order. I haven't heard from him since. Hopefully I won't. Edit 1. Working volunteer at student pubs is very usual where I'm from. I'm from a small country in Europe, just to clarify. Edit 2. I probably should have specified, but this was not a very professional website. It looked like a website from the early 2000s, even though this all happened in 2011. And even though the pictures of my face were clearly manipulated, it was still super creepy. My guess is that the website was more for his own entertainment than anyone else. It seemed to be a running joke to check out his website once in a while and laugh at the content and how creepy he was. A joke I didn't really want to get into, since I thought of him as a nice guy until all of this went down. To understand some of what happened to me in this story, I have to give you a small amount of backstory. I am a female college student, only 5 feet and 3 inches tall, the same height I've been since middle school. and 112 pounds at my heaviest. I was 17 years old when this occurred, and I am 19 now. However, I always seem to look younger than I am. Most people think I'm 14 or 15, though I had never been creeped on before this incident. It has been pointed out to me before that my small build, young age, and even younger appearance makes me look like a victim. One last thing you readers must understand about me is that I, at a very young age, was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, an autism spectrum disorder. Among my symptoms are struggling to read facial expressions, tones of voice, and body language. Facial blindness, meaning I struggle to remember faces, and some hypersensitivities to sound. The latter symptom doesn't normally bother me terribly much, but I do like to keep headphones on or earbuds in whenever I can to block out sounds other than music. The incident in question began barely a few weeks into the beginning of my senior year of high school. I had a 0 period, so every day I would have to be at school and in my class by 7 in the morning. The catch was that I had to walk, as my mother was the only one with a car and never had time to drive my 2 sisters or I to school. I would usually leave the house by 6:30 at the latest, and I always went alone since my sisters didn't have a 0 period like I did. And being that it was autumn, it was very dark in the mornings, even in a relatively safe, though rather large town such as the one I lived in. This was a recipe for trouble. Every morning on my way to school, I would have to walk past a small set of houses beside an Arco gas station. The middle of the 3 houses was the home of a Hispanic mustached man who would always sit on his porch in the morning and watch me walk by, even when I chose to walk across the street from him. I'm a terrible judge of age, and I believe he may have been somewhere in his 50s, but regardless of his age, I always felt that he had no business watching me every morning. And unfortunately, it wasn't just in the morning that he watched me. Every afternoon while I walked home, he would again sit on his porch and watch. He watched other kids as well, but his gaze always seemed to pick me out, even in a thick crowd. It creeped me out, but not enough to warrant me telling my mother or grandmother, whom I call Nana. Perhaps because of my autism, I somehow wound up believing that his behavior might not be that strange. I was, after all, aware of the fact that people reading wasn't a skill of mine, so I just tried to ignore it. This continued on for months, with nothing of great importance occurring. I walked and he watched. That was it. Until that is around early July. One day I was walking to school in the early morning again. Some jerks in my neighborhood had begun popping off fireworks in spite of the early hour, and the fact that the New Year's holiday was in the past. I didn't like the loud popping noises, so I had put my headphones on and turned on a flute song. The sound of the wooden flute soothed me, and I turned the volume up loud enough that I could drown out the fireworks a bit without deafening myself. Because of the loud music, I didn't hear the creeper man when he, for the first time ever, tried to speak to me as I walked past. I don't know if this angered him or not, but it did prompt him to walk over and lay a hand on my shoulder. Since another of my symptoms is an aversion to being touched, save for under certain circumstances with certain people, I I immediately recoiled from the man. The swift movement, combined with the way I jumped, was enough to cause my headphones to slip off my head and around my neck. Almost as soon as they did so, I turned to the man and he, for whatever reason, smiled at me. "I spoke to you, sweetheart. Guess you didn't hear me." There was a small pause, then he asked, "What are you listening to?" I didn't say a word back to him for several reasons. One, I was startled. Two, I was well aware of the concept of stranger danger, and didn't like speaking to new people anyway. Three, I didn't think the answer to his question was any of his business. Fourth, and finally, I didn't want to waste time and end up being late for school. So instead of replying, I simply turned and resumed walking to school. Nothing further happened that day, apart from the man's usual staring, and I didn't tell my mom or Nana. However, my ordeal wasn't through yet. The events of that day ushered in a new period of creepiness, with him now trying to speak with me every single time I passed his house. Even when there were well over 100 other people around. But because I could never really read him, I could never quite tell if he was just trying to be overly friendly or if he was genuinely being a creeper. It bothered me, but I still didn't tell anyone. And things only escalated from there. Around March, I was genuinely stalked for the first time. I walked past the man's house one morning, as I always had to do when walking to school, and he suddenly got off his plastic chair, stepped off of his porch, and walked beside me. He stayed there the whole way, only leaving when I reached school. This, of course, freaked me out. But one aspect of it didn't. There was only one high school in the whole town. Large though said town was, so I figured he would know my school either way. Still, him following me did finally scare me enough to consider speaking about it. But of course, I was a fool and didn't. Instead, I did something I have learned to do over the years to express myself. Something I struggle with. I wrote. By the end of May, I had filled a good couple of pages with small snippets of journal entries where I vented about my encounters with the man. During that time, he had accompanied me to school nearly every other day and had put his hand on my shoulders and arms multiple times. He always seemed to enjoy the way I jumped, and would smile every time I would try to glare. Then, about a week into April, he got creepier. He walked with me to school again, despite my attempts to get him to leave, and talked the whole way. At one point, he told me quite suddenly, "You're special, sweetheart, I can tell. My niece is a lot like you, she's special too. I like special girls." I had no idea what he really meant by that last comment. But something about it freaked me out enough to prompt me to sprint the rest of the way to school, textbook-laden backpack in tow. I was no track star, but I was fast enough to lose him. He made chase, but thankfully stopped once I was within the school's gates. After that, he simply walked away. Still, my journal entry for the day was quite creepy in comparison to the rest. This is where my wonderful Nana comes in. My Nana is a hard woman to live with for many reasons. One of those reasons being that she was and still is a very nosy woman. Barely 3 or 4 days after the man made that special girls comment to me, my nana happened upon my nondescript spiral notebook, journal, sitting on my desk in my room, which one had to pass through to get to the backyard. Having never seen it before, she promptly picked it up, opened it, and read its contents. Its secrets revealed. My normally grouchy but also very protective and loving grandmother freaked out, called my mom, and the two of them picked me up after school that day. One would think that this sort of incident would have been reported to the local police, right? Well, that didn't happen. The reason for this is the fact that the cops in that town genuinely don't care about doing their duties, unless they think weapons are involved in the crimes taking place, which often leads me to wonder how the town stays as generally safe as it is. A prime example of their lack of care was when my sister was stalked and harassed by some large teenage boys on the way home from school once. The police said she had probably somehow provoked them, and that nothing could be done. My mom never really forgave the local cops for that. There was only around 10 of them, nor did she ever regain her trust in them. As such, the only change that occurred was that she and my nana helped me work out a new route to get me to and from school, as I struggle with learning streets and the like. And my nana promised to pick me up in the afternoons whenever she could. Nothing else really happened after that. I avoided the man successfully and life went on. The only other thing relating to this incident that ever came up was a rumor. That rumor was that, supposedly, the man who had stalked me to and from school was a well-known pedophile. I never learned if that was true, and I moved away from that town with my whole family that August. The chances of my ever seeing that man again are slim, and I'm very glad. Edit. I mentioned at the top of this post that I struggle with face blindness, but forgot to explain why this is relevant. The reason why it is important to the story is because, even pretending the cops had cared about the stalker man, I likely would not have been able to tell them anything more than what house he lived in and that he had a mustache. And of course, that may not have helped if there were other mustached men living with him. So needless to say, there probably still would not have been much of anything done by the police in that case. Before the story begins, I want you all to know that everything I've typed is 99.9% true. It wasn't until these events transpired that I knew for a fact that the supernatural world exists alongside our world. I've had things in the past happen to me as an early teen, such as my ghost cat, but I brushed them off because no one would believe me. To get things going, I am a male. Earlier last year, in January, I was 19, swearing an oath to protect and serve as a member of the United States Air Force. I wouldn't leave for basic training until April of 2015. During that time, I did the delayed entry program, in which we would get different briefings and, nonetheless, basic training stories from airmen who had just come back, or even members who endured the 8.5 weeks of training 20 years ago. Never did I hear a story of haunted dormitories or ghostly encounters. Usually, It was about the stress of MTIs yelling and knife handling, along with trainee duties and funny, embarrassing fuck-ups during the training. That being said, of course, I didn't think anything of hauntings in dormitories, and because of that, I was not prepared for what would happen to me during my time there. The dormitories of the 322nd Training Squadron are very old compared to some of the new dormitories that were recently built. From constant bathroom problems to mold in crevices and in the lights, and it was fairly difficult to keep the dormitory clean. After all, it's already pretty raggedy, along with a number of things that can't be fixed, but we get shit for it anyway. With its age comes past flights that occupied the dorm, and with that comes history deaths from trainees committing suicide while in training. 2 weeks into basic training, my bunkmate and I, let's call him Trainee Glenn in order to protect his identity, were on shift for EC duty. EC, which is abbreviated from the military term entry control, is a 24-hour cycle where 2 of 50 trainees are selected and are responsible for who comes in and out of the dormitory. That itself was frightening because when an MTI came screaming and banging on the door, you had to be on point and verbatim with the very strict entry process. But that's another story for another time. Unless we have a briefing or class to attend, there would always be entry controllers on duty, so keep that in mind. Early in our few weeks of training, Trainee Glenn and I were set for EC duty from 10 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. One shift consists of 2 hours on the job, and at night, one of us makes rounds around the dormitory to check wall lockers in both bays, as well as the bathroom every half hour on the hour. We began to chat and get more acquainted with each other. Talking during shifts kept us aware and helped us stay awake as well. So we talked on about our home lives, and it took a turn when ghosts became a subject in our conversation. Trainee Glenn was prone to the supernatural from past experiences, and tales from his Asian heritage that he said still haunts him to this day. We went on and on about things we've experienced, and gave each other goosebumps and chills. All of a sudden, we started hearing something, a whisper, maybe, coming from a bay. Maybe it's someone snoring or talking in their sleep, I said, evidently creeped out after all the stories. Then it got louder. It became clear that it was a female's voice. There is no designated dorm for males or females because even our sister flight had urinals in their bathroom. Glenn began to start freaking out, so I decided to make my rounds to check out the sounds. I took my Lackland laser, our flashlights, and walked through both bays. No sound but a couple of barely audible, snoring trainees. But this was not the sounds we heard prior. What we heard sounded like a female voice having a full-blown conversation with someone. We even made out a few words. Where am I? What's wrong with this? At one point, I heard my first name being called, which no one in my flight knew at the moment. When our shift ended, we couldn't get undressed and in bed fast enough after the next 2 trainees took our place. A few weeks went by with nothing seen or heard but little bumps, and at one point a laundry bag in the utility room keeled over, which we all tried to debunk but couldn't. Until this. I was talking to another trainee, let's call him Rancher, while he was on midday EC. We were in the hallway and I was standing in front of the utility room because I was laundry crew. Worst mistake ever, taking that job, by the way. We conversed until a black mass caught both our eye. It came out of nowhere from the left of the hallway. It was oddly shaped and slithered into the utility room. Trust me when I say it wasn't someone else's shadow. We both knew what we had saw, and went on to tell the story in which only a few other trainees believed because of their experiences with the entity in the dorm. The last personal moment I had with a ghost in our dorm was one of the most profound things that I ever experienced, and has been branded into my head forever. It was probably the 6th week of training, and I was in the day room on a Sunday with 3 other trainees. I instinctively peeked out of the room into the hallway to check for incoming MTIs. On Sundays, random MTIs like to come randomly and ruin the peace. Luckily for us, there was not one in sight, not even an EC. What I did see was someone who I thought was another trainee. Slowly, but in a purposeful manner, walked towards a utility room, their back facing me. I immediately took an approach because, as a member of the laundry crew, it was hard enough doing the laundry and making sure other trainees got their respective gear. But sometimes they'd go into the room and tarnished what order we had with the laundry, which we got so much shit for because of complaints of missing garments. Note, the utility room is very small and there's only one way in and out. I followed that trainee, even yelling, "Hey, what are you doing?" as he cut into the room, and as I walked into the room, I peered in and, of course, nothing, not a soul. Well, kind of. My stomach sank as I looked over at the laundry bags. The only figure looking, that was a mass in the room. And my hairs instantly went up. I couldn't believe what I had saw. The ghost had ABUs on, top to bottom, and I was sure I was about to nab someone tampering with the laundry. I went from agitated to utterly afraid, and ran back into the day room where I also found trainee Glenn and Rancher, who had just come in to tell them what I had just seen, as well as others who would care to listen. I would continuously get stories from trainee Rancher who would do EC duties for baby flights in other dorms. He's had experiences ranging from wall lockers opening by themselves. Every time he's closed one, another one would open up a few rows down from that one, to hearing voices and seeing shadows moving in the dark. We even had a non-believer turn believer after he did EC in the other haunted dorms as well. Other accounts have been noted. During my graduation, ghosts were brought up, and my older sister, who was in basic months before me in the same squadron, said she had experienced some paranormal activity as well in her dorm. I will never forget that last one, though. How can anyone explain seeing a full-body apparition in uniform walk into a room and disappear into thin air? Because even my logic can't conjure one up. For those who join the military, you may find that history in the dorm still continues, no matter who walks the bays. Please be aware the following story deals with themes of psychological and physical abuse. This occurred when I was 18 and very naive. I am now 22. I am 5'4" and very petite. These details will make sense later. I was dating a guy significantly older than me, 14 years to be exact. Let's call him Jake because I'm not sure if he's still keeping tabs on me. and I don't want to piss him off more than I have. I have never shared this story with anyone other than my parents, only because police were involved. Jake and I had been seeing each other for about a year. We were pretty happy and in love. I was very, very wrong about what love was supposed to be, and it seemed as though we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. I modeled as a side job and came home one night after a shoot. Being that I was very exhausted and caked in a ton of makeup, I decided to take a hot bath and relax. I was basically living with Jake at the time in his apartment. Jake was there when I got home, and I immediately went to the bedroom to put my purse down and went to the bathroom to take a bath. Let me explain the layout of the apartment, as some of the details may help you understand better. When you walk through the door, the living room is to your left, and the kitchen is straight ahead of you. Past the kitchen, there's a narrow hallway, and at the end of the hallway, there's the only bedroom. Right before the bedroom to the left is the bathroom where I was. Jake played volleyball on a co-rec team and was getting ready to go as I sat in the bathtub. I kept the door open so we could talk, being that I had not seen him all day. All of a sudden, Jake starts acting weird. He starts pacing back and forth between the kitchen and bedroom. So I saw him walking past the bathroom multiple times. As he walked down the hallway, he stops in the bathroom doorway and calmly states, "You can leave now, slut." Now, being that we have been together for almost a year, this set off an alarm in my head, and I got out of the bathtub, dried off, and got dressed as fast as I could. When I walked down the hallway to the living room, he had my phone pressed to his ear and his voice tinged with anger. I could only make out some of the words, and they were not good. I immediately came after him to try to get the phone from him, being that I did not know who he was on the phone with. We basically played cat and mouse around the house until he decided he was done, ran to the bathroom and shattered my brand new phone on the ground. He turned around and got in my face and screamed, "Now you can be a little whore." Confused and now terrified, as I had never seen this side of him, I'm only able to get out a pathetic whimper. He then proceeds to accuse me of cheating on him with my photographer. Still to this day, I find this absolutely absurd. Let me tell you word for word the text messages that Jake was so pissed off by. Photographer: "You did great at the shoot." Me: "Thank you. I can't wait to see the proofs." Photographer: "I will give you a call as soon as we're ready to review them. See you next time." That was it. I know you're sitting there wondering, what about that set him off? Honestly, I still wonder to this day. I always wonder if he just wanted a reason to lash out. Anyway, after he had smashed my phone that I had just purchased, I decided to get even. Jake was a big gamer, so I stormed down the hallway with Jake at my heels, grabbed his computer monitor and shattered it against the wall. Already on the precipice of losing his mind, Jake then grabs my shirt from behind me and yanks me back against the wall, causing me to hit the back of my head. I immediately get back up to take a swing at him, steaming pissed. His hands meet my throat, and the next thing I know, I was gasping for air. Being that I was such a small girl, it was very easy for him to overpower me. Releasing his grip, he shoves me on the ground. It is about this point that I have had enough and stomped out the door. I get to my car in tears, with a sore head and a shattered heart. I drove to a nearby gas station to use the phone just to tell my mom about the incident. At the time, I just wanted to leave, drop it, not get the police involved, and never speak to him again. I wish I could say that was what happened, that he left me alone, and I moved on and never spoke to him again. But unfortunately, that was just the beginning. I drove home to my parents and put my SIM card into an old flip phone we had at the house. Jake called me and texted me repeatedly. I answered the first time saying that I did not want to talk to him anymore and that I wanted to cut things off. He did not take that well. It was like he thought I was going to come crawling back to him. These texts and calls continued. I would get a phone call when it went to voicemail. He then would hang up and text me right after and then try to call again. This occurred for 24 hours straight. My dad did not know about Jake at all, but my mom did. Around 4 a.m., with my phone still going off, I decided to answer and try to tell him to leave me alone again. Before I could say anything, I hear, "If you don't quit your modeling job, I will release videos of us having sex to everyone on our email list." I just want to pause and say, I had no idea he was taking videos. Honestly, I still don't know if these videos exist to this day. Anyway, back to the story. He had managed to hack into my email account and make it so I couldn't get back into it. I couldn't call his bluff. He also told me that if I got the police involved, he would immediately release the videos, so I complied. I called the modeling agency with him in the call. He demanded to be in the call, so he knew without a doubt that I quit. I spoke to my agent and told her that I'm quitting my job modeling. I gotta say, it broke my heart. I loved modeling, and it was my dream to become successful in it. This was the first door that opened up and allowed me to start making a career out of it. But if quitting made him leave me alone, I was willing to do anything. Unfortunately, he did not leave me alone after I quit. The calls and texts continued. Yes, I know you're wondering, why hasn't she changed her number? I'll tell you why. He was still threatening to release the videos even after I quit my modeling job. So there I was, stuck in a corner, wondering what to do next. I decided to tell my dad. Obviously, he was furious that I was dating a much older man, but was even more mad at him for what he had done to me. The next morning, I decided that I've had enough and was done being afraid. So my mom and I went to the county courthouse and decided to file an order of protection. I spoke with a lady who took down the details of the incident and his information and filed it. Later that week, he was served with the papers. I just got the confirmation from my case officer. Let me tell you, I did not breathe. I did not leave my house, and I did not stop worrying until those papers were served. I was scared out of my wits, and I was terrified that he was going to kill me. My parents drove me to work. I worked at Walmart at the time, and I would be at the register with my manager close by. I had sat down with the store owner and came up with a plan of action, with a secure area included if he was to walk in the door. I refused to be alone. It took me a few years to return to myself. Yes, I changed my phone number. I got a new car so he didn't know what I drove. I got a new job so he couldn't find me at work. We even moved so he didn't know where I live. I am happy now with my life. I have a supportive family. I've graduated from college and I have a wonderful boyfriend who shows me daily what true love is. I never understood why people subjected themselves to abusive situations and why they don't just leave. I hope this story serves as proof that sometimes it's just not that easy. There were so many red flags throughout the relationship that I didn't see because I thought I was in love. I'm going to list them in hopes that I help someone realize that they are in an abusive situation. Number 1. I wasn't allowed to have any guy friends. I had to explain who every single person was in my phone, and if he wasn't okay with them, I had to stop talking to them. Number 2. I wasn't allowed to have any social media. No Twitter, no Facebook, no Reddit, no nothing. Number 3. He never wanted to meet my family or friends. It was always about what he wanted. Number 4. He made me feel like I never did anything right. I tried my hardest to please him, but it never worked. Those are just a few, but please, if you think you are in an abusive relationship, get out now. I'm lucky that it didn't turn into something worse, so Jake, let's never meet again. This happened when I was a young and impressionable 14-year-old back in 2011-2012, and was frequenting online chat sites for role-playing purposes. It was a bit of a bad habit, but as an introvert who didn't have many friends, it was how I did social interaction. I'll say for myself that even now I still have some of the friends I made back then. But let's not talk about them. Let's talk about my friend, Alex. Alex was a guy that I met in a Doctor Who chat room. He sent me a private message for something I had said in the room that I don't remember, and we struck up a conversation. I remember he had really good grammar, and he typed paragraph-long messages. He told me that he was 2 years older than I was, and lived on the West Coast, somewhere in California. At the time, I was living with my parents in North Carolina, so it was quite a considerable time difference. Yet, he always seemed to have the time to talk to me. As long-distance friendships often do, we sort of disintegrated. I could tell that he was making valid efforts to talk to me, but I just lost interest and found myself moving on after a few weeks of talking to him. One night he sent me what amounted to an essay's worth of messages describing his love for me. How he just knew that we were meant for each other, yada yada yada. It was completely out of the blue, so I politely rejected him and ended our correspondence. He would continue to send me paragraphs of text every night, talking about our love and how perfect I was, blah blah blah. I eventually blocked him. Fast forward a couple of months to early 2013. I wasn't role-playing anymore, and it was the second month of my first serious relationship. One night my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The owner of said number was apparently looking for a friend of his. I informed him that he had messaged the wrong number, laughed it off, and then we texted on and off for the rest of the evening. Dude seemed pretty nice, and he said he was pleased to have made friends with a supposed wrong number. I concurred, still kicking myself for that. As we talked over the next few days, I found myself telling him about Alex, what had happened, how uncomfortable it made me, how relieved I was to have found someone else and be in a happy relationship. My new friend was unresponsive for a couple of hours. I just figured I had annoyed him with my sob story and wrote it off. I was soon woken up from sleep by my phone practically exploding with new notifications from my friend. It was Alex. He had changed his number just so he could text me and pretend to be a stranger who had the wrong number. He said that he still loved me, that I was a dumb slut for moving on from him, and that I had to break up with my boyfriend and rekindle our flame, or I would be sorry. Yikes. I blocked him and didn't tell my boyfriend anything. More months passed and I eventually forgot about Alex. I would still get occasional messages from unknown numbers, saying innocuous things like, "Hey," and "What's up?" I blocked it every time. I wasn't taking any risks from someone I didn't know. It wasn't until I was 16 that shit really hit the fan. At this point I had changed phones and numbers. I was FaceTiming my boyfriend, same one from before, when I got yet another text from an unknown number. But this one was different. It just said, "I'm here." I had no doubt that it was Alex. I said my goodnights to my boyfriend and ended the call before doing the stupidest thing I could have done. I answered the text. "Who is this?" I played dumb. And he saw right through it. He responded with, "It's me, baby, it's Alex." I always talked about the two of us being together, and now we finally can be. I love you so much. I wanted to throw up. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I'm in Raleigh. I moved out and drove to find you. Tell me where you are and I can come pick you up. We can get a place and finally be together." Raleigh is the capital city of North Carolina. I live several hours away from it. Luckily enough, he didn't know this. I was 2 steps away from panicking. Looking back on it, he could have been lying. But at the time, I was just so terrified that I couldn't think straight. I told him to fuck off, that he was crazy, blah blah blah. He got pissed. "What are you talking about, honey? Why are you doing this? I came all this way just so I could be with you, and you're going to push me away? Don't be such a selfish bitch, and just tell me where you are." I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked the number, turned off my phone's location services, and didn't sleep. Unbelievably, I never heard from him again. I don't know what could have happened to him, and I have no idea how he got my number after I changed it. He came across my Facebook feed early this year, and his page said that he had moved to Atlanta and had a girlfriend now. I hope she's okay. Please be aware the following story contains themes of rape. To start this story, I need to warn you it is all true, and I'm going to keep the names of the parties involved private for safety and privacy issues, and create fake ones for them and myself. I need to tell you about my upbringing, so you can understand why I made such a huge mistake as this at just barely 15 years old in August of 2006. I was brought up in a very strict religious home. I wasn't entirely sheltered, but being in such a strict environment and whatnot, I wanted to rebel as any teenagers would, to have the freedom some of my friends and acquaintances did. Though I didn't have many friends as I was pretty shy, I took to the internet for a lot of friendships. And I just recently created a MySpace account. This guy added me. He had mutual friends of mine and lived where I do, a small Arizona town. And he seemed relatively attractive, so I accepted his friend request. He started messaging me and came off incredibly charming. After talking for a few days, he talked me into letting him come over to my house, while I was the only one home to meet and hang out. I was incredibly nervous, as my dad was very strict and he terrified me, but that's another story. This guy, I'll call him Nate, still had that charm about him, and talks me into it. Well, the next day came and I was incredibly nervous. I'd never had a guy at my house before, alone, to hang out. And he was 4 years my senior, and my dad would have killed me if he found out. When he came to my door, I immediately felt an uncomfortable vibe, but I brushed it off and let him in. We sat down and started watching Charmed on the TV, and talking a bit, but not very much. I didn't find that odd though, as I was pretty shy at the time, and I'm generally a quiet, reserved girl. After about half an hour, I went to the bathroom on the very other side of the house, in the back. When I came back, he was gone from the living room. So I walked through the doorway of the living room into the computer room. My room was directly to the left and the doors were wide open. I saw him standing in there with his back facing me, standing next to my bed. So to my stupidity, I walked in to see what he was doing. Nate then turned around and I saw he was holding a pair of my underwear. Now I really felt uncomfortable and didn't know what to do. I just froze in fear. He then grabbed me and threw me on the bed. You can imagine what followed, but I'm not going into detail. After he was satisfied, he quickly left. I felt so ashamed and sick, I didn't know what to do. Finally, after 3 weeks, I confided in my sister who lives in Utah. She tried to get a hold of a counselor in my town, but to her and my surprise, it turned out to be my school resource officer. The next day, I was pulled out of class by 2 officers to my utter horror. They took me to the police station and called my parents and questioned me and came to my house to collect my sheets and clothes from that day. They found him the next day, with my older brother's help, and as there was no proof after 3 weeks, since the incident had occurred, they had to go by his word that it was consensual. And he was still arrested, as I was only 15 and he was 19. He got sentenced to 1 year in prison several months later for it. Fast forward a year and a half, and he is back out. These girls I went to church with ended up meeting him and befriending him, telling me, wow, people change. Another girl I knew started dating him, even after I pleaded with her to stay away, and showed her his public record. And she was so blinded, she said he changed as well. A few other girls were smarter and gave me printed out messages from him claiming he was 17 and just got back home from visiting Ireland for a year. I gave it to the cops. Not even 2 months after he got out of prison, he was back in for sexually assaulting 3 more girls. and 2 more stepped forward from before my incident with him, because of my bravery as well. He is now in prison till 2025. I just wish I could go back in time and had reported it immediately after, as maybe it would have prevented those other girls from being hurt. Never meet someone you met on the internet alone at your home. You never know who they may truly be. When I was 15, I got my first job in my tiny rural town in an artisanal tea shop. Once the summer months rolled around, my job became working an iced tea stand outside. It wasn't a bad gig, but it did inspire a lot of irritating and slightly creepy individuals to talk to me for long periods of time. One day, this scruffy guy who seemed a bit off wanders over to my tea stand and starts chatting with me. I keep trying to steer the conversation towards him buying an iced tea, but he was only concerned with talking to and about me. We'll call him Tom. He starts asking me how old I am, where I go to school, my name, etc. As I was still young and naive, I told him, trying to be friendly. Tom then proceeds to tell me his entire life story. He told me how he was in his early 30s and his girlfriend died, and he overdosed on heroin on a bathroom floor. No exaggeration. He stood there for hours going into detail until my boss had to come out and tell my friend to leave. I was definitely put off, but thought it was more sad than anything else. The next day at work, Tom comes back to my job. The moment I saw him, my stomach started turning. Great, another day being annoyed. Tom immediately pulls out a 10-page, handwritten love letter he wrote for me. I began reading it, but it was mostly just literary porn. He then continues to tell me he's never met anyone like me, and how I wasn't tainted by the world yet. This guy flat out told me I was his angel sent from heaven. Great. The next few days, Tom comes back every day I work with a letter. Eventually, I just begin throwing them out, or refusing to take them, and my boss has to tell him he wasn't welcome there anymore. If this was where it ended, I probably would have forgotten about it by now. When he lost his chance to contact me while I was working, he started messaging me on Facebook. I recently looked back at some of the messages he sent me. One in particular was a fiction story he wrote about me, the conclusion of which was basically that he decided I was too beautiful to exist, and that my existence was torturing him. So he pushed me off a cliff. I would block his account, and he would make new ones and message me poems, stories, letters from there. After a while, he must have gotten sick of me telling him to F off and stopped messaging me. Fast forward about 1.5 years, I'm 17 and working at a dingy restaurant in the same town. It was a very laid-back job, and I got along well with all my co-workers. One day, to my dismay, I see Tom walk through the door. I kid you not, I saw this guy's whole face light up with glee when he saw me. I'm surprised he didn't see the horror written all over mine. Again, he comes straight to me and doesn't buy anything. Just starts immediately saying how I still look like an angel. I think he found me working here by accident, but once he figured it out, he was not giving up. He started coming back every single day again and messaging me on Facebook all over again. I couldn't believe he was still doing this. One co-worker I was close with, we'll call him Max, started picking up my vibe when this guy came in. He ended up telling me that he went to high school with him and he got in trouble for stalking more than one girl. In addition, for having a lot of drug issues. Basically, he was bad news. The next time Tom came in, there happened to be nobody else in the restaurant, and Max told him to not so subtly walk out and not come back. He didn't. To this day, Tom still occasionally messages me on Facebook from a blank account to tell me how much I'm torturing him. I'm not sure if he ever had real malicious intentions for me, but for the sake of my sanity, let's not meet again, Tom. Edit. I went to the cops when it first started. They knew who he was immediately, but told me there was nothing they could do unless he actually did something, and to basically just stay away from him. As if I wasn't trying. Several years ago, in the mid-80s, at a small neighborhood grocery store I worked at, I had recently become assistant manager at the store and was working until close by myself. Our store was in a suburban neighborhood and it was on the edge of town, meaning about 10 minutes to the right was a more populated area with a McDonald's and strip mall, and 5 minutes to the left was going into rural farm areas. We were located in a part that was a mix of business and houses. We were the only businesses in our area still open, as we were surrounded by doctor's offices, a dentist, and an insurance office that closed earlier that day. It was a Friday night and a couple of the employees I was supposed to work with had either called off or went home early, if I recall correctly. So I was stuck by myself towards closing time. Not that it was a big deal, as our store was rather small compared to the big box grocery stores that were starting to crop up around the area. Business was winding down and I was excited. It was about 9 p.m. as I was planning to meet up with some friends at an under-21 club later that night. It was late fall as I remembered getting dark around 5 p.m. I was about to lock up in a few minutes and decided it was a good time to take a bathroom break. Now, our store bathroom was one of those one-occupancy toilet rooms where you had to lock the door when you were using it. There was a block window towards the top that was frosted so people couldn't look in. But I noticed the shape of a face pressed against the window. I let out a slight scream and the shape moved away. I stayed frozen out of fear in the bathroom. About a minute later, I heard footsteps come by the bathroom door and saw the handle jiggle back and forth. My heart was thumping so hard I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. Then it stopped, and I heard the footsteps walk away. Now, for some reason, I thought maybe I was being irrational, and it was a last-minute customer who came in to use the restroom. Despite the creepy face I saw in the window, which is the side edge of the store property where customers don't go. So I mustered up the courage to walk back out into the store. I didn't see anybody, so I quickly locked the door and did a quick sweep by the aisles to make sure no one was in the store. I flipped the sign to say closed and dimmed the lights. That is when I noticed a pickup truck in the parking lot. It was parked toward the end of the lot where my car was, but it was facing the store, and suddenly flicked its headlights on and off towards the store. I ran into our small office and was freaking out. I wanted to call the police, but our store owner had always discouraged us not to call the police, even if we were robbed, to just hand over the cash in the register. His philosophy was calling the police would bring negative attention, that the store was unsafe. Customers would go elsewhere and his insurance rates would go up. So here is a guy in a truck obviously up to no good, and he is between my car and the store, so I can't even make a run for my car. And was it just one guy or more? I wasn't sure if he was signaling at me or someone outside. I couldn't tell. Would they break in and come after me? My heart was going crazy, and I was thinking irrationally. I was thinking of all the places I could potentially hide in this store. And then I got an idea. Our truck loading dock was around the back and was a way out. I opened it and made a run for it, running through people's backyards all the way home. I told my family, who did call the police, and my family drove back to the store in the middle of the night to get my car. There were no other cars in the lot other than mine, so the truck left at some point. The police were not sure if they had come to rob me or for me, since I was working alone. After I left, there was nothing noticeably missing, since the loading dock was left open. I quit this job shortly after, but often wondered what was in the works for that night.